there's still one more thing I want to cover. If you remember at the beginning of the module, I mentioned that ASP.NET MVC couldn't live inside of the OWIN pipeline. But I did say it lived happily together with OWIN when using Project Katana. So let's have a look at what happens when you add ASP.NET MVC to the mix. Since I created this project using the empty template, it doesn't actually include ASP.NET MVC. So the first thing I need to do is head over to NuGet once again and install another package. In this case, I need to install Microsoft.ASP.NET.MVC. With that in place, I can go ahead and create my MVC controller. So I'm just going to go Add Controller, and then select the empty MVC5 controller. And I'm just going to name it Home Controller. Since I don't want to do anything special inside this controller, I'm just going to leave it with the default implementation. This means that there will be an index action that returns a view. So I'm just going to close this file down and focus on creating that view that it's supposed to be returning. And since the action is called index, I'm going to name my view index, and I want to make sure that it doesn't use a layout page. Since I manually added my ASP.NET MVC packages from NuGet, I'm actually missing a few web config settings that you normally get in your project from the template. But we can get around this by just adding a simple inherits, making sure that this page inherits from system web MVC web view page. If we don't add this inheritance, ASP.NET will be kind enough to give us a yellow screen of death telling us that it's missing. We also have to add some form of content that tells us that we've actually got this from MVC. And considering my lack of creativity, I'm just going to go hello from MVC. And with that in place, the view is actually done. So I'm just going to close that down and start focusing on the next thing we need to get this going. This means creating a global ASAX file. So I'm just going to go add global application class. And yes, it needs to be named global. What we need to do in here is add a route for our controller and action. We normally get this out of the template when we create an ASP.NET web application. But since we chose empty and then went ahead and got MVC for NuGet, we have to do it manually. This means getting hold of the route table, which is a class that's available in system.web.routing. On this class, there's a property called routes, which has an extension method called mapRoute, which is available under system.web.mvc. This method takes a few parameters. The first one is name, which can be pretty much anything, but I'm just going to call it default like it normally is. Then the second one is URL, which takes a weirdly looking string, which is supposed to be curly brace, controller, curly brace, slash, curly brace, action, curly brace. So these are placeholders for the controller name and the action name. And finally, it takes a parameter called defaults. The default parameter is an anonymous type with two string properties. The first one is controller, and in this case it should have the value home, and the second one is action, which in this case should have the value index. These are the default values that will be put into the route unless they're specified using the path. So the last thing we need to do is to make sure that there is no other middleware that would cause any problems. In this case, the hello world middleware that we put into the pipeline is actually going to be a problem. Because the way that MVC works together with Katana is that if there's no middleware inside the pipeline that will send back a response, the request is actually passed on to ASP.NET MVC for handling inside the MVC framework. And since that brilliant hello world middleware always returns a response, nothing would actually pass on to ASP.NET MVC. So let's just go ahead and comment out that middleware. And with that out of the way, I guess there's nothing left to do than just press F5 and see if we can actually get anything back from MVC. And we do. We do get hello from MVC. It's a bit slower to get it back from MVC than just returning it from the OWIN pipeline, but that's because we have to spool up the whole ASP.NET framework before we can get a response back. Luckily, that's just on the first request, so subsequent requests will be a lot faster. But for the sake of being thorough, I guess we should check that we haven't broken any of the other frameworks. So let's just head over to Nancy to see if that works. And it does. We do get hello from Nancy. And if we go to Web API, we do get a JSON file back, but it's working. So I guess that's it. We have managed to get an OWIN pipeline that includes Nancy FX and Web API. And we've even added ASP.NET MVC at the back of it, so if there's nothing in the pipeline that responds, MVC will just take over and handle it.